I want to thank all of you so much for your support. I need to share something with you that's very important. There are so many of you who I've had the opportunity to meet in Iowa and New Hampshire who've expressed to me how frustrated you are that the DNC and the corporate media are essentially trying to usurp your role as voters in choosing who our Democratic nominee will be. I share your concerns, and I'm sure that all of our supporters throughout the country do as well. Now, the 2016 Democratic primary election was rigged by the DNC and their partners in the corporate media against Bernie Sanders. In this 2020 election, the DNC and the corporate media are rigging the election again, but this time it's against the American people in the early voting states of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. They're attempting to replace the roles of voters in the early states using polling and other arbitrary methods, which are not transparent or democratic, and they're holding so-called debates, which really are not debates at all, but rather commercialized reality television meant to entertain rather than to inform or enlighten. So in short, the DNC and the corporate media are trying to hijack the entire election process. So in order to bring attention to this serious threat to our democracy and to ensure that your voice is heard, I'm seriously considering boycotting the next debate on October 15th.
Everything Tulsi has said in this video is true. It is also true, however, that the DNC, as they get more stringent in their protocols, that she knows that the fifth debate would be that much harder for her to get to because the DNC was going to change the rules once again. I call this the Tulsi Gambit. It required other members, lesser members who are running in the race, Booker, Harris, and some of these other people, to join in with her in order to kind of create a united front, kind of like the YouTube thing. That one channel saying that they're going to create a union doesn't really matter. If you get 1 million, well, now you have something. My argument on Sunday was that this was going to fail, that ultimately you were going to end up in a process where Tulsi gets into the debate. She had to get into the debate because in order for her to have any opportunity to get into the fifth debate, if she didn't get a lot of people who I didn't think she was going to get, then she needs to do something in this debate in order to create enough momentum to get into the fifth. The catch is, she's right. The polling and this kind of stuff is somewhat arbitrary, and the number of polls going from point A to point B is not enough to show momentum, even though she had a certain degree of momentum. Someone said, Obi Alfred, it's not that the Gambit failed, it was a stunt. You were still woefully naive about Tulsi. Gambit or stunt is the same difference. I think you're misunderstanding my point. This was never going to work. The goal of this was essentially to gain attention of sorts. Whether you call it a stunt or a gambit, doesn't really matter. Both of those things equal the same. I think your point is she was never going to stop the debate. My point is she would have if she would have gotten a ton of other people to join her. The catch is she was never going to get those ton of other people to join her, which is why I said the gambit was going to fail. You're looking at it with a dark lens. I'm just looking at it as this is kind of what it is. My point is this. Tulsi did have a point. Tulsi will be on that debate stage. I am glad she's going to be on that debate stage. And instead of trying to get some level of change this way, she's going to have to try to get on the fifth debate stage doing something in this particular debate. Catch. The New York Times is going to be one of the moderators in this debate. The Daily Beast ran a story, I think it was the Daily Beast, essentially saying that because Tulsi had 3 people who were sympathetic to Russia in her donor list at this point that was in the thousands, that she somehow was a Russian plant. The New York Times runs a story saying, what exactly is Tulsi Gabbard up to? Now, the Daily Beast is somewhat of a rag online, and the author, all authors, have a political point of view, regardless of what they try to say, meaning there are things in the world that they want and don't want. Integrity is an expensive process, so I understand where the Daily Beast is coming from, even though it was an outright disgusting, slanderous article to write. New York Times is supposed to be the paper of record. The New York Times ran this article. I saved the article to my Google Docs. What exactly is Gabbard up to? Without even going into the entire article, let's start at the subline. As she injects chaos into the 2020 Democratic primary by accusing her party of rigging the election, an array of alt-right internet stars, white nationalists, and Russians have praised her. You can stop there. I can go into the article. It gets more ludicrous. They even go into legalization of marijuana, and because the alt-right is on board for that, that this somehow tarnishes Tulsi Gabbard. The New York Times will be co-moderators in this debate. The woman who wrote this slanderous, outright ridiculous article, not as an opinion piece, but as an actual piece of quote-unquote journalism. Here she is again, Lisa Lear. The Times will be co-hosting the debate with CNN. That's great. One outlet that has been outright slanderous of Sanders, and another outlet that has been outright slanderous of Gabbard. Regardless, the debate will take place tonight. Tulsi Gabbard will be on the debate stage, and there are several candidates that need to show out in this debate to get into the fifth debate, and not just get into the fifth debate, remain relevant, and to show themselves as frontrunners. Let's talk about the fourth Democratic debate and what to expect and what needs to happen for various candidates in that debate. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content and you find yourself coming back often, please like, share, subscribe. Of course, you can always support PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, and all that good stuff, even Streamlabs. Gabbard, in a tweet, I will be attending the debate. Gambit fails. You got to win the game in a different way. I want Gabbard on that debate stage. The people who are hosting the debate, CNN panel stunned after Bakari Sellers calls Tulsi Gabbard a puppet of the Russian government. Again, these are the people who are hosting the debate. Nevertheless, she has to excel in this debate in order to create enough momentum to get to the fifth debate, because the DNC will most likely, in some arbitrary fashion, come up with a new polling rule set and a new donor threshold in order to essentially get and determine who's going to be on the debate stage. Let's talk about the fourth debate and what needs to take place in the fourth debate in order to make for the various candidates. Sanders, who just had a heart attack, will be on a debate stage. It goes without saying that two things needs to happen for Sanders. One, he needs to show himself as vigorous, needs to show himself as aware, and needs to show himself to be able to create, in the second part, a distinction between Warren. Meaning any notion of a truce between Warren and Sanders needs to be over. And a conversation, or you could say an interview that Sanders had, Sanders, for the first time, finally made a distinction between himself and Warren, using this notion that she is a capitalist to her bones and he is not. Well, it needs to go further than that. It needs to go to the point of being able to show distinction with policy and to be able to make that distinction on a debate stage in front of the American public so the public can show and see that these groups, these two people, are not a one-to-one. Oftentimes, what happened would be that because you have so many people on a debate stage, and on this one you're going to have 12, that Sanders and Warren would be talking about issues in a similar enough fashions that the other right-wingers on stage, it comes across as if these two people are for the most part the same thing. From a political standpoint, this is brilliant in Warren's fashion. I mean, people want change. They want something that's different. They know Sanders is that different quantity, and they see this person who's standing there, a little bit younger, a woman, saying similar things. And they can look at this process and say, fair enough. Let's just go with the quantity that's for the most part the same, just younger. Sanders, for the most part, has allowed this because he said on more than one occasion Elizabeth Warren is a friend of his, and when you're on that debate stage and all of these people are attacking Medicare for all, it helps to have somebody in the foxhole with you that is also defending this particular product. However, she believes it in theory, not in practice. And I got to be honest, I don't even know if she believes it in theory. Ultimately, Harry Reid agrees with me on this, that she did this for political reasons. She gets on stage, she says one thing. When she gets out on that stage, meaning on the campaign trail, she says something else. Meaning she said on more than one occasion that she's for multiple plans. Now the catch is, I don't know what that means. What are your multiple plans? If I'm trying to evaluate somebody, Medicare for All is a very specific plan, and many of the candidates have put out their specific plans. Warren has not. Sanders, on a debate stage, needs to make that clear. It's one thing for me to say it. It's another thing for him to just kind of go along with this notion as if she believes in the same thing that he believes in. She doesn't. But that needs to be made clear, and it needs to be made clear on a debate stage as the various issues come up. It can't be enough to be on the stage and essentially just allow her to skate. She's a front runner at this point. In fact, by real clear politics, I have a hard time saying that word for some reason, she's number one. It's not enough to try to create a distinction between you and Trump. It's not enough to create a distinction between you and Biden. You also need to do something that you don't particularly want to do, and that's create a distinction against Warren. Whatever truths you thought you had is over. Ends now. It needs to show on the debate stage. Vigorous, meaning you just had a heart attack, so people need to see that you're still Bernie Sanders. And B, the distinction on the debate stage. Truce is over. Don't have to be nasty, but you do have to vet. Vetting is important. Joe Biden. Joe Biden campaign is having problems. A, his son is massively corrupt. B, Joe Biden is massively corrupt and has been so going all the way back from the time he just got into politics. Well, that's massively corrupt and not necessarily the best of times to have the conversation, seeing he's running for president of the United States. The Democratic Party has decided to try to eat through Trump with an impeachment hearing. Trump, in his defense, has essentially said, the guy who you have as your frontrunner is just as corrupt. And if his son was named Trump Jr., you guys would be howling at the moon about it. You want to give him a pass because he is Joe Biden. Trump is not going to give him a pass. Republicans are not going to give him a pass. And they have started screaming to the hilt about Joe Biden and his corruption, especially with the standpoint of his kid who has been treading on Joe Biden's name. Your son, crackhead, who apparently didn't listen to enough record players and needed a government worker, to help him out. No experience, gets a job making $50,000 a month. In a country where you knocked over the government or helped knock over the government. This looks massively corrupt. It looks as if the kid who was a drug addict, who had no experience in oil and gas or in the Ukraine, that gets a job at a massively corrupt energy company in a government that you helped knock over. Look, this looks problematic. And then you get the prosecutor fired, bragging about it, holding an aid package. That looks massively corrupt, Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden doesn't want anybody else to mention this, meaning his campaign has been trying to silence news organizations and the other campaigns from mentioning that very issue. And it's not just this. I mean, Tom Brokaw was dealing with Joe Biden when Joe Biden was pushing in order to make bankruptcy or stop people from being able to file bankruptcy while his kid was working at one of the bankruptcy companies, one of the lead companies that was going to benefit from the legislation Joe Biden was pushing through. Tom Brokaw was talking about this, meaning Joe Biden's corruption goes back for decades. It goes back for decades. Joe Biden doesn't want any other campaigns mentioning this. Why not? Why not? You're in a presidential campaign, buddy. You're being scrutinized for the behavior that you've taken over the last 40 years. Not just in policy, but also in this notion of corruption. And now he's taking a no corruption pledge, and his kid is saying, hey, I won't be on the board of companies that, my dad is pushing through legislation where I'll benefit from. Too late. Too late. Joe Biden needs to, A, deal with this issue of corruption, meaning when people deal with this and talk about this in a way that people can believe, because nobody believes this notion and that this drug addict kid who has this job making $50,000 a month got that job on his own merits. Nobody with brains and eyes. So you're going to have to talk about that in a way that makes sense. And that's assuming somebody brings it up. Julian Castro, looking at you, buddy. Joe Biden also needs to be competent. You can't get on stage and say black folks don't know how to raise their kids. You can't get on stage and talking about gays and the disco and all this other stuff, talking about San Francisco. You have to be competent. You have to be cohesive in the way that you talk about things. That has not been something that you've been for the last several debates. And last, losing your frontrunner status and on the way down and not having really policy prescriptions that people want to hear about, you are going to have to somehow throw a punch. And up to this point, you've only been taking them and not necessarily been taking them well. You are going to have to be somewhat aggressive on the stage. And that's something that I think is difficult to do, especially for Joe Biden, especially the later it gets into the night. Elizabeth Warren. In Warren's case, she has now become frontrunner, meaning that the other campaigns are going to be out looking for her and gunning for her because they want to take the piece out of her. She is going to have to be able to take that. I mean, when you get to issues of foreign policy, Warren falls apart. And if anybody on the campaign stage starts to vet her and bring up dishonesty and untrustworthiness for things that happened into her past, she has to have decent ways to answer that, not necessarily going all over the place, especially if people bring it back and say, well, Warren, you didn't necessarily answer that question, and go after her for it. Why did you vote for that particular military budget? Your parents didn't elope. The eloption thing is not necessarily going to come up. You worked as a corporate lawyer back in those days when you say you were trying to help people out. That's not necessarily true. Yeah, you got to answer that. That's something that should come up. You didn't stand for Native Americans, even though you're out here talking about Happy Indigenous Day. All of these things are things that should come up. And beyond that point, the differences between her and Sanders. The differences between her and Sanders. The catch is, the other candidates are not going to bring up those differences. The other candidates may bring up distinctions on things that she has been untrustworthy in her past about. Untrustworthiness may be the problem with Warren's campaign. Meaning you can say whatever you want in policy. Nobody believes you. You don't believe in Medicare for all. On the campaign stump, you were talking about something else. Other campaigns may bring that up. Meaning, if you are on stage arguing about Medicare for all and you're arguing for it, one of the other campaigns, Julian Castro, Gabbard, any of these guys can say, on the campaign stump, you were arguing about something else. Now you're talking about Medicare for all. Do you believe it or not? Truthfulness, untrustworthiness can be one of the issues in the way that they attack Warren. She is especially weak on this issue. The catch is a Democratic primary, and whether they will bring this up or not is a question. It should be brought up, especially if the campaigns want to win and want to get to the fifth debate. All incentives in the world are for them to do this. By the same token, it's a Democratic primary, and there are certain blind spots that they may avoid in lieu of it being a Democratic primary. I hope you understand what I mean. It should be explored because the goal of it is to win, and every incentive is to do so, with the exception of the one main disincentive is you're in a Democratic primary, and it may be frowned upon by other Democrats. That shouldn't matter. Your goal is to win. That's all I'm saying. Warren has to remain consistent. She has to remain consistent, especially if they're bringing up issues that go beyond just domestic policy. If she doesn't remain consistent, this debate could show her unraveling. Think about what happened to Tulsi Gabbard and Elizabeth and Kamala Harris. Tulsi Gabbard in that debate unraveled Kamala Harris's campaign within 30 seconds. If you remember, Kamala Harris had floated up to the number 3 spot after the first debate. After the second debate, she tumbled down and ended up in single digits. Right now, Kamala Harris is in single digits, even in her own home state. This debate would be problematic for Warren if she gets into a situation where her bubble is popped. She's surging now, but that surging, there's still a lot of people who are unclear on necessarily what they want. And she's getting a lot of media attention that's been lavished on her. And it's been a gentle way in the way she's been running this campaign that could end tonight in this debate if her bubble is popped. Ask Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris can tell you exactly what I'm saying is true. The debates, in large part, drive the narrative, how a campaign behaves, the things that come out, the spots where the campaign is able to get something that's a viral hit. Those things matter. The debates are the things that the people judge you by up until the point where you get into the election. And right now, this fourth debate will be a big debate, especially for Warren, for Sanders, and for Biden. It is extremely important for these people, especially in the flux that has taken place, meaning Warren floating and surging or floating to the top, Sanders remaining even despite the fact he just had a heart attack, and Biden losing his leadership status. The campaign is in flux. I've said before, it's an interregnum. The Democratic Party and the elements of the party, not to mention the public, is fighting to determine who is going to maintain legitimacy. The Democratic Party lost to reality shows. After losing to reality shows, they also lost, 1,100 seats all throughout the United States, the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. They lost it all. And this is after Obama having a supermajority in the Senate and owning the House. It's a loss of legitimacy. That loss of legitimacy forces this kind of fight of sorts. When an established party who goes with this narrative that we are the established party, we're the adults in the room, when they no longer can win, then you have, by definition, all incentives in the world to say you have no legitimacy. You can't win. And if you can't win with the most rabid bunch of Republicans, then you don't need to be in power. It's the reason why the moderates, like Klobuchar here, can't get a fair or can't get a hearing. It's the reason why all of these other, 18 moderates in the race can barely make it over the hedge. And if Warren wasn't in the race, Sanders would be winning in space right now. That's why Warren is aping lefties. It's why when Obama ran, he ran with this notion of hope and change because he knew people wanted something fundamentally different. I'm making a point to you that the reason that all of these other moderates in the race are not getting the resonance that they would typically get is because the public wants something fundamentally different. Warren knows it. She knows who butters her bread. Hence the aping. And hence the need to vet and to get across what's real. Gabbard. All right, Gabbard runs with a gambit of trying to throw out this thing that I'm going to not do the debate. Now, the reason she didn't do this is not in this, it's kind of like Boris Johnson saying, I'm fighting for freedom and democracy. You're not really fighting for freedom. You're fighting because you know that the leadership on the other side gave up this notion by accepting a Remain premise. So you can say, well, we're fighting for the referendum. I mean, ultimately, it just so happened that you are fighting for the referendum. By the same token, you're fighting in order to cut regulation. Gabbard knows that her stock goes down after this debate, meaning she has a hard time her giving up the fourth debate is all she got, because by the time you get to the fifth, she may not be in it. Meaning the rule set, the process that the Democratic Party has chosen in the way that they're pursuing this particular cycle is doing it in ways that is going to exclude more and more people as it goes further along. I mean, they had 20 people in the debates, so it's right many people. The problem is they're doing this in a way that is somewhat, I don't want to say random, but it's disadvantageous to some campaigns, especially some campaigns that are showing a legitimate buzz. By the time she gets to the fifth debate, the process itself may exclude her, and the process itself is not necessarily fair. Think of it in the terms of the last 2016 cycle, superdelegates. Democrats will say superdelegates are part of the process. It's a fair process. But is it fair? You have certain people who essentially have associations with established leaders in the party, meaning Clinton, and they believe that they're going to be penalized if, not to mention, they just agree with her. In which case, they throw their support behind her. So you may have a state where Sanders wins in spades, but the superdelegates ends up giving it to it. Well, one man gets the vote of like 20,000 human beings. The process itself is not fair, even though they would say this is the process to which we're using, and it's fair by the definitions of the process. I'm saying this is kind of the same way with the democratic process now. Ultimately, they're going through these debates, and they're trying to find ways to exclude the people so they don't have 20 people on a debate stage going forward. They want to have less and less and less. They don't want to have to deal with this process. Unfortunately, there's some people who are getting somewhat of a buzz. In this case, I'm saying Gabbard, who, if they had a fair hearing in the third debate, meaning if there was more polling out, she would have been in the third debate. The fact that she ended up in the fourth debate gives some kind of credence to her argument that your process is dodgy at best. She made her last stand for the fourth. She wouldn't be able to do it in the fifth because she may not make it to the fifth. It's not entirely this notion that the process is not rigged. She's right about that. She's even right about they rigging 2016. She's trying to do a touchstone in order to get a certain degree of support from Sanders supporters who know that the process was rigged in 2016 in order to kind of call an attention to this one. The problem is you need other campaigns for that. I mean, you need many of the other campaigns that are running in the race to join you in this to create a weight about it. You doing it by yourself doesn't necessarily. Trump has upped the number of troops that are going into Saudi Arabia. Gabbard's entire platform is foreign policy. If she can't talk about it in this race, she'll never get to talk about it. But the thing is, she can talk about it in a way that is somewhat off-kilter to many of the people who are on that stage. And she provides Sanders room. This is why I don't understand Sanders supporters attacking her. Ultimately, you want your candidate to be further to the left on foreign policy. Sanders has every pull to not be that way, even though he does come out saying Yemen and these type of things. Gabbard on that stage gives him room to move further to the left, and any push on Gabbard on Sanders allows him to move further to the left. I think it's a positive. I never thought Gabbard had a chance of winning. And so for me, I could be ultimately magnanimous because I thought she gives me what I want on a debate stage. She pushes Sanders to the left, and even if she does do well, so what? I get most of what I want. The pulling back on the Medicare for All thing loses me, if I'm being honest. But I still want her on that stage. Like, I want her pushing him on that stuff. So I didn't necessarily see this as a negative. However, whatever she's going to say, whatever she's going to do, it needs to resonate in a way with all this media attention on what Trump is doing in Syria right now. This gives her somewhat of an opportunity to make her foreign policy pitch while something else is going on in the headline where she could hook it to. There's a chance. That's a chance. That's all she ever had, right? And the rest of the candidates, Yang included, they need to come up with something that gives them resonance, something that allows them to just be the other people in the race. The fifth debate, I think Yang has already made it to the fifth debate. Buttigieg, these candidates, for the most part, needs to have some kind of breakout moment that allows them to jump in the race. I don't know what that breakout moment would be, to be honest. Klobuchar is, well, just bland. She's essentially white bread. But many of the other candidates are also, I mean, for the most part, all of them are clones of one another. Tom Steyer is going to be in this race. Tom Steyer is a billionaire that essentially just bought his way into the race. Look him up. He literally just dumped a ton of money in a particular area in order to get polls in his favor so he can get into the Democratic primary. He will be on that debate stage. 12 human beings in a cockfight on a network that for the most part has biases towards some of those candidates and has media money that incentivizes them towards some and against others. From the standpoint of this network, this is just another show that they can get profit off. And yet this is supposed to be our primary process. You have a cockfight of 12 people trying to get attention, trying to essentially get up in the polls and all of these other things and trying to have a breakout moment. Reality doesn't necessarily assert itself into this. It's just whatever they can say for a byline. This goes to Tulsi Gabbard's point of this just being a media showpiece. Even on that, she is right. This video is a bit long, and I apologize for the length, but I mean, it is right much to kind of go through, especially since you have so many people that are going to be on the debate stage. Sarah Powell's Ron Paul report, we have been trying to reach a deal with Turkey. Kurds, Turkey is taking the land they wanted, the Kurds off the border, and Turkey clear the safe zone and resettle the Syrian refugees. Let me say it again. Ron Paul report, we have been trying to reach a deal with Turkey. Kurds, talking about the Kurds. Turkey is taking the land they wanted, the Kurds off the border, and Turkey clear the safe zone and resettle Syria. No, I understand that, Sarah. And this whole quote-unquote safe zone, this stuff is Syrian territory, though. And the Kurds, if we're being honest, the deal to reach was essentially with Syria seeing its Syrian territory. And reaching a deal with Syria would have ensured that the land was never invaded by Turkey, who, again, doesn't own that land. The safe zone is just political casting. It's naming something. We're talking about Syrian territory that Turkey is just called a quote-unquote safe zone in which they've just invaded. And how do you know that they're not going to just stop going beyond that safe zone? Erdogan's standpoint, he is trying to, not necessarily, maybe the Ottoman Empire is too strong, but he is definitely doing a land grab. And Trump, in Syria, how on earth is the United States giving over Syrian territory to another country? I mean, I find this to be ludicrous. We shouldn't be over there. We shouldn't be over there. And if we're going to leave, maybe you shouldn't leave in the way that's most chaotic. That is, giving over somebody else's territory to Turkey. Let's see. Mars colonialization. We better fix our issues here first, but yes, I still want to go. Not the same. Tulsi being against costly interventionist wars is not the same as her being against wars in general. I never said she was. Did I? Okay, fair enough. I might have used shorthand. I tend to make the difference between Tulsi saying I'm against interventionism or I'm a non-interventionalist, meaning I don't like this notion of regime change wars, versus just being anti-war. Like Howard Zinn might be considered anti-war. Howard Zinn will make an argument against the Second World War. And the Second World War was quote unquote one of the good wars, as they call it. So fair enough. If I said that, that's my fault. That's my bad. She's not calling for a reduction in the budget or a drastic change in that foreign policy. You might be reading between the lines here. That's fair. I mean, what she does... Well, wait a minute. I don't know about the last part. I could be wrong, but I thought she has called for a reduction in the budget. I could be wrong. I need to be fact-checked on that. As for, by definition, if you're stopping in a foreign policy where you're not trying to knock over governments. I mean, we're in Syria right now because we're trying to knock over that government. We were in Iraq because we're trying to knock over that government. Afghanistan. I mean, when you think of the number of wars that we've been engaged in, drawing down from that and not doing that, by definition, is somewhat of a drawdown in the budget that we need in order to allow that. You're right. I could be reading between the lines in the sense of non-interventionist wars, but if you think of what we've been doing from the standpoint of our foreign policy, it has been knocking over governments. I don't think I'm wrong on this. I don't think I'm wrong. But you're right. I could be reading between the lines in regards to how far she would go with that, which is why I would love to have her on the show to have an interview where we can get into those conversations that I never hear people delve into. So fair enough. Not the same. Or Balthazar. Marcus Will, don't blame Trump for what is happening between Turkey and Syria. Part of the plan working with the Kurds was to make sure that the Kurds didn't work with Assad. The Kurdish gambles failed. Trump was appeasing the John Boltons and the Chomskys of the world. Come on! Yes, what you just said is right. But what you just said is also part wrong. I am blaming Trump. We shouldn't have been there, yes. The Kurds is kind of making this deal with this notion of trying to get their Rojava. Yes, fair enough. And they trusted the United States. That is also true. But Trump had agency. Nothing was stopping Trump from not doing what he did. Meaning, Trump didn't have to just yank the troops out in the way that Trump did. Now, you can make a case that says, well, Trump could have never worked with the Syrian government based on the political space. That part's true. And I even agree with you on this notion that the United States can't be there forever, which is why I continuously make this argument that I'm not against pulling the troops out. My argument is pull the troops out and bring them home. But that's not what Trump did. I guess that's my issue here. This notion of pulling back and letting Turkey take Syrian land is just absurd to me. It's absurd to me. But a lot of what you said, I agree with. I mean, my issue with Trump is that he pulled out the way he pulled out. And that is not pulling out at all, but giving over Syrian land to a country that it doesn't belong with. Trump should have worked with Syria if he was going to work with anybody. And turning that land over to Turkey, where Turkey considers those people terrorists, is dicey at best and not something that he had to do. By the same token, I don't believe we should have been there at all, let alone be there forever. And the media is attacking him, not in the way that I'm attacking him. Like, I'm attacking him because you gave over somebody else's land to Turkey. That's my issue. My issue is, I'm attacking him for not bringing the troops home and then lying about it. They're attacking him for not staying forever. It's so weird. The issue of you gave over somebody else's land to people who it didn't belong to doesn't factor. That doesn't really matter in mainstream media. If you're watching the news, they're just attacking him for not staying forever. I mean, it's fucking insane. Why do you believe it's the United States' responsibility to prop up an autonomous region? That's what I want to know from the press. And beyond that point, beyond this notion that we should stay and prop up an autonomous region, if it is true that the Kurds got rid of ISIS, why do we need to prop up the Kurds? Like, why can't the Kurds defend themselves if they were such an elite group that they were able to take down this ISIS? Why is the Independent coming out with articles saying that a report shows that ISIS and their technology is beyond, it goes beyond what they would get off the battlefield, meaning they were being assisted by countries like Saudi Arabia and countries like us? I blame Trump for pulling out the way he did, not for pulling out. Never supposed to. Okay, that was going to be nasty. I'm not going to say it. All right. Nothing was making Erdogan attacking the Kurds either. And he were. That's true-ish. I mean, Erdogan has a certain foreign policy philosophy. And if you look, I think countries work in their interests. Just across the board. I don't have this notion that countries work for love and light. Not even the United States. Erdogan has this idea of an area that he wants to take. Trump essentially gives it to him. What is Erdogan supposed to say? No, I suppose he could, but think of who we were talking about, think of where we were talking about, and think of the history of that region, meaning this kind of Ottoman Empire thing that we're talking about. And think of some of the stuff that Erdogan says that doesn't necessarily bubble up in our conversation, meaning talking about this kind of Ottoman Empire stuff. Just saying. Oh, I mean, trolls happen, man. Trolls happen. Trump is just listening to the generals. You think so? Maybe. I mean, look, I think Trump wants to get out there. That's what I think. I think he wants to find a way to extricate the U.S. to some degree. I mean, that's what he's pledging on his campaign, and that's what he was out there screaming about recently, even though he was lying about it. But he also has this philosophy that Obama screwed up in Iraq because he pulled out. I mean, that's Republican dogma at this point. So he needs somebody to fill the gap, in which case he chose Turkey. By everything that I've read up to this point, that's where we are. He's moving troops around as a strategic tactic, not because he wants the troops home or anything like that. Okay, I mean, like I said, he's not bringing the troops home. And I've said this on more than one occasion, even though Trump supporters may believe Trump on this front. He's just moving them around. But no, he's not bringing them out. I don't think Trump really cares about getting out there. He's just listening to the handlers while trying to gain political points. Yes. Yes. I agree with that, Garden. Well, ish. Like, I think all things being equal, he wants to keep campaign pledges. All things being equal. If you can keep a campaign pledge and there is not a huge amount of pushback, I think anybody in the position would do it. I don't necessarily think he cares about the region. I think he cares about campaign pledges. Moving the troops around, it's just weird. I'm sorry, it's just weird. And it's like moving the troops around, then saying, I'm getting our troops out. It's just weird. It's just weird. He's not ending anything. Yeah, he's putting out tweets talking about he's ending wars. He's not ending anything. He doesn't care about keeping pledges. Garden, I think he does to a point. But I think he does only in the sense of there's no pushback. Like if you're a president or a candidate, and you make a particular pledge, and you know that your supporters, at the very least, to some degree, are going to like you that much more if you keep a particular pledge. That's why he's like, I'm going to build a wall. I don't think he gives a shit about that stuff in real terms. I do think he thinks that building the wall is something that his public or the people who support him will like. So what does he do? He screams about building the wall. He screams about building the wall. And he goes to the bat for building the wall because it allows him to fail at all sorts of other things while at the very least saying, I did X. And so you have Syria. I don't think he gives a shit about what happens in Syria, which is why he was willing to just give it over to Turkey. Yeah, here, take it. I get my troops out. He doesn't know shit about that area. I guess my point is he doesn't care about what takes place in Syria in those terms. He wants to at the very least have the appearance of keeping a campaign pledge. I do think he cares about the appearance of it. It's that weirdness it makes sense strategically. Let the rabble kill each other, move in after. Oh, I see. You think he wants to bring in American troops after the fact? Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that one, Garden. The guy's a narcissist. It's hard to say he cares. Yeah, I don't think he cares about anything. He's serving his political interests and his whims for maintaining his image. Yes, that's what I think. Adam Bell, yes. Yes, that's what I think. I don't think he gives a shit about the region. I think it looks good on the campaign stage. I mean, he is out there, like right now, when he's on stage, he's screaming at the height of his lungs about, I got the troops out, I'm ending these wars. He's not doing that at all. Now, the moment that you pull back, however, and you have Turkey kind of take that region, if the media, looking on the media, it looks like Donald Trump's pulling. It's an image thing. I don't think it's just for his image. It's just for an image. Bring him home. If you're going to if you're going to have this much fallout, just bring him home. Just bring him home. Send him in the parade. Bring him home. He might not bring the U.S. troops in after he might use proxies. Yes, that Garden, I agree with. He will use proxies. I mean, the U.S. has decided to do that in all sorts of wars. I cannot believe you throw shade on withdrawing troops. I don't care who does it or why. Michael Pancho. I'm not throwing shade on taking the troops out. My argument is bring their ass home. My issue is he's not doing that. And this video has gone all the way into the other one. Don't veto any of the word genocide. Yes, Ruben Garcia, that's true. I disagree with the Kurd Zion analogy. It's ignorant. Kurds are many religions. Yeah, I don't take it as... Oh, you're arguing with him. Fair enough. Look, it is not the United States' responsibility to prop up an autonomous region in somebody else's country. As a flat fact, I would argue that to be true. And that's not true. You can't say it's a flat fact. But I would say that there is nothing in our laws, in a sense where we are not being threatened or attacked, where we use our brave men and women to go and prop up another country or an autonomous region in that country. It's not for us to do. And if that region was that, mighty and so forth, why do they need us? Why do they need us? Kurds ran to make deals with Assad. Flat fact true. If Trump would have done that, none of this would have happened. That's why I blame Trump. That's why I blame him. This didn't have to happen in this way. Like, share, subscribe. I'm going to be on a radio show today at 5. I'm probably going to be leaving here around 3. I'm going to try to get 1 or 2 more videos in, so I'll see you guys in a few. Like,